Let's raise some big questions. The UGC's equity regulations, are they timely? Are checks needed against false complaints made on the grounds of caste discrimination? Can these equity panels be made more representative, or are we dividing our campuses once again on caste lines? Joining me now, Professor Sukhdev Thorat is former chairman of the UGC. Professor Thorat, your first reactions to the intense protests that have begun, particularly among upper caste students and groups who are saying that these new equity rules could be misused because of broad definitions of discrimination, potentially fueling campus conflict involving OBCs, SCs and STs versus upper caste. How do you see it? Will this lead to a divide on caste lines on the campus?
No, I don't think. Thank you very much, Sardesai, for bringing me here on this particular issue. I don't think it will lead to divide. One has to understand that the 2012 regulations have been in practice for the last 12 years. The Untouchability Offence Act of 1955, which was renamed as Protection of Civil Rights Act, which has a provision against punishment for untouchability and caste discrimination even in the education institutions. Similarly, the Prevention of Atrocity Act of 1989, which has a provision of discrimination in admission. This has not led to the divide and the...
Sir, but now OBCs, if I may just interrupt, because the difference between 2012, the updated version includes OBCs, and many worry because the OBCs are such a large block that therefore this could lead to false complaints.
No, see, listen, the 2012 2026 regulation has watered down the 2012 regulation. As a matter of fact, it's much more softer than what is contained in 2012. 2012 regulation has removed the forms of discrimination. As a matter of fact, the definition of discrimination remains same. It is the United Nations discrimination definition. So definition of discrimination remains same. They have even removed the forms of discrimination, and they have left it to the equity committee in the university to decide to list the discrimination. Now, coming to the OBC issue, listen, the OBC did not have a reservation in the central education institution and IITs and central university. It was done in 2011-12. And now, after they got the reservation in the educational institution, they began to feel the discrimination on a much smaller scale, perhaps with a lesser intensity than the scheduled caste. But they began to feel discrimination, calling them as a quota student, and reservation is not being filled. In fact, the reservation of the scheduled caste in faculty and student is much less than that of scheduled caste. It's not in proportion to the population. So there is a justification that if the OBC face discrimination, there is a necessity to have a legal safeguard to them against the possible.
But sir, if I may, the legal safeguards is one thing. You mentioned equity committees, that colleges will have to have equity committees to look at these cases of discrimination. Now, as per the rules, the equity committees must include members from SC, ST, OBCs, women categories. But there is no mandate for general category representation. So that again leads to fears that these could be one-sided, that certain groups could lose out. Are these all irrational fears in your view? Are the students being misled by politics?
No, I think the regulation doesn't mention that the entire committee will consist of SC, ST and OBC. In fact, that is one of the limitations which is pointed out by the...
No, but it does not specifically mention general category, sir.
No, it's not mentioned, but there will be general. You look at the provision that they mention that there will be generally one each person from scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBC, which means rest of them will be general. So I don't think that fear is there.
But is there a need for such a regulatory? Do you believe that there is a need for regulation? Because when I look at numbers, 378 complaints in 23-24 across thousands of institutions in such a large country. Do you believe that you need this regulatory overall of these equity committees? Do you believe the problem is serious enough of discrimination to need these committees?
Well, that's a very important question, Sardesai, that you have raised. We have to go back in the history a little bit at the time of framing of this 2012 regulation. I was the chairman of the UGC, and 2008, the there were 2 suicides in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and the principal secretary of the Ministry of Family Planning and Health approached me to chair a committee to inquire into the reason as to why there are suicide in the All India Institute of Medical Science. Reluctantly, I accepted that, but then I did a survey. There was no support, but nevertheless, I was able to generate the data. And it was a first somewhat systematic report which brings out the discrimination faced by the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe from the high caste student, from the high caste teacher, and from the high caste administrator. And this was given in percentage terms and even in qualitative terms. So discrimination was there and we identified the spare in teaching, in evaluation, in laboratories, in cultural life, in hostel, in separate mess. So that led to the exposure of the fact that the education institutions are not immune to discrimination. And then
So you're saying it's necessary. So you're saying it's much needed, it's necessary. Allow it to actually function. And if there are any irregularities, they can always be corrected later. Am I correct?
No, irregularity in which? In the regulations?
If these equity committees do not perform according to their specified mandate, then you can relook at it. But to protest even before they come into being, you believe is a flawed way of looking at it. Am I correct?
No, I will answer.
Do you support it? Do you support equity committees or not?
Yeah, I do support equity committee, but let's just have a background to this, please, Sir Desai. That after the regulation in 2012, there were suicide by Vemula, there were suicide by Payal Tagdi, and then there was suicide by Solanki in IIT Mumbai. As a result, these 2 mothers went to the Supreme Court, and the case was taken by Disha Wadekar. And they asked that remove certain inadequacy in regulation 2012 and enforce it properly. And Supreme Court then advised, they called the UGC and they said that please give us information how you are enforcing.
Right.
And the UGC then issued out a letter to the all education institutions to mention as to how many of them had set up the equal opportunity office and how many complaints they got about discrimination. Half of the education institution did not set up the equal opportunity office. The complaints were less, not because that there is no discrimination. The complaints were received, they were passed on to the counselor. No action was taken.
Right.
So it is the less effective implementation of 2012 which led to the intervention by the Supreme Court.
I take your point, and I think it's important to have that background in place. I hope that that this issue, therefore, is seen in its wider context of a society where there is embedded caste discrimination at various levels, and therefore it's important to have, many believe, these committees in place and make them as transparent and effective as possible. Professor Thorat, for now, I appreciate you joining us. We will carry forward this debate, of course, in the days to come. Thank you very much, Professor Thorat, for joining me.